Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here for another live stream. So I'd like to show you these beautiful flowers here, and then I'm going to set it down because I don't have a place to set them that will still show up here. I'll turn off the music now. All right, so thank you guys for being here. This is getting to be really fun to do live streaming as opposed to having to spend like 10 hours or so recording and editing together a video. So thank you, Euphoric Soul, for being here. Welcome, everybody. Please check out her channel about life in Korea. And then Kathy Coates is here. Hello, Kathy. And Kathy is also partly of Korean heritage. So please check out Kathy's channel with all sorts of delicious food recipes. And I love all of your holiday cookies, so many festive things that she is showing us how to make. So today's episode or today's video is going to focus first on the topic of how to avoid divorce. So let me tell you about my so-called credentials. Well, first of all, I have been an attorney handling a lot of divorce and custody matters for almost 21 years now. I have also done other types of civil litigation like employment discrimination cases, but I would say that divorce cases probably have gradually constituted more and more of a greater percentage of the kind of cases that I handle, because unfortunately divorce is quite prevalent. So you might have heard the general statistic that half of all marriages end up in divorce. And then I followed up and read some more articles, and some people are saying that, well, actually, a 50% is a little exaggerated. So maybe it's more like 40%. So just, anecdotally looking around at my whole extended family, as well as all my friends of friends, people that I know of, I would say that maybe about like 30% of them wound up divorced. So, and then I started thinking about all these weddings that I have attended in the past. I don't go to many weddings anymore, but it is probably more like 30% of the people I have known who wound up getting divorced. So first step, of course, the glib answer to how to avoid divorce is to not even get married in the first place. But of course, there are some benefits to be had to being married. For example, especially for men, married men live longer. Statistically speaking. And of course, there is more financial security. It's better for the kids in general. I mean, obviously, if it is a terrible, volatile, abusive relationship, then that is not any better for the kids. And so thank you guys for chiming in. So Euphoric Soul and Kathy says, I have at least once. I guess that means in response to being divorced. Okay. So I got divorced also, and I have luckily I shouldn't say luckily, but I have since remarried. And so I've definitely learned a lot along the way. I've also been trained to be a certified divorce mediator or certified family financial mediator and a superior court mediator. And I've also been trained in collaborative divorce. So my last video that I just put out the other day was about collaborative divorce and what is it, and in general, what's the basics of the procedure if you want collaborative divorce. So conversely speaking, hello, blessed girl, Joe. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Blessed Girl Joe also has her own YouTube channel, and she teaches us a lot of different things and also covers lifestyle issues. So please tune in to her too. So anyway, just based on my experience, okay, other than just saying don't get married at all, I think it definitely starts with the person that you intend to marry. So anybody out there watching, if you have not gotten married yet, then this is where you have the most hope, because you don't have to get married to the person that you're dating or even engaged to if you see some really big red flags already brewing. Because, just based on my experience, so many people, they come to me because they are getting divorced or planning to get separated. And they start complaining to me about their spouse and all these issues. And it's very rare that somebody just suddenly has like a midlife crisis and bam, they turn into a totally different person. I mean, sometimes that does happen. So you can't really control it if later in life, your spouse just suddenly decides that, or, comes out and says, he's gay and he wants to be with men. You can't do anything about that. But, there are other issues that are usually already brewing, or you already saw signs of these like problems in your relationship or in the person's character, but you chose to ignore those warning flags because you were just so happy to have somebody, you were in love or lust or whatever, your emotions took over, so it clouded your judgment. So that's why, to me, I think it's so important that you know the person for at least a couple of years before you even get married to them, because otherwise, it's just really your fault. It's like you failed to do the proper screening, or you didn't really get to know the person, you didn't view the person objectively before you decided to jump right in and get married. Oh, and so this is nice. So we do have a young person here, Tyler, who I think is like in his 20s, and as far as I know, he has never been married. And life partnership, FTW. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of young people now, they don't even want to get married. They just figure, we'll just live together. There's no need to get that license. And plus, there are tax consequences that are usually bad when people get married. So I do know somebody who told me that the reason she and her long-term boyfriend, you wouldn't even call him a boyfriend because that just sounds so silly and frivolous or something. So it's her life partner, or maybe she refers to him as her fiance, but they're never going to get married as long as the tax laws are like that, because otherwise they would both be paying a lot more in taxes. So, and both of them are divorced. So, they just agreed that, hey, we're living together, we own a house together, we're going to be together, but we are never going to get legally married. So Shane B says, what is a prudent way to share finances for a married couple? Okay, well, let me tell you what I've always done. Like, I always kept my finances separate. And the reason being is that, well, number one, I'm kind of a bit of a control freak. And number two, I think it creates more harmony because, like, you don't want to have to just constantly monitor each other, but other people feel like, no, we should have a totally open and sharing everything type of relationship. And, why should the person want to hide their finances from me? Because what if they're having an affair or whatever? Yeah, because I've definitely been involved in some divorce cases where somebody didn't want to turn over their credit card statements, but it turned out that, like the husband had already been like signing up for some like dating website, like blackpeoplemeet.com or worse yet, going to strip clubs or who knows where, and that was showing up on the credit card bill. So this has happened multiple times, or worse yet, like one of the spouses might have already paid for a private investigator to follow the other person around, and it showed up on their credit card statement, so they don't want to turn it over right away. So prudent way to share finances. I've heard a lot of people say that they do have like one joint checking account that each person contributes a chunk of their pay to, just depending on the inequities of the income, because a lot of times people don't earn exactly the same amount. So maybe the richer spouse would contribute more of the money for the joint account to pay the mortgage or pay the utility bills, whatever sort of joint expenses they have. And then they each have a separate checking and savings account. And of course, most people have, or, your retirement account is always in your own separate name anyway. But for me, I just always prefer to keep my finances completely separate. And then we knew that, one person was supposed to pay this bill, the other person pays this bill, just work it out. And it typically works. And that brings to mind another issue. This is part of the pre-screening process. So these are the red flags, and I'll just rattle them off real quick before we get off on a tangent. Okay, so number one red flag is that the person has like some bad addictions, usually like I see alcohol and drug addictions. And typically, say the client coming to me would say that, oh, he's like falling down drunk, to the point that he peed in his pants in front of everybody, like something really embarrassing. He was like so drunk showing up to the kids' soccer practice that he like fell unconscious. And I'm just like, the more I get to know the situation, the more I realize this person with the drinking problem has been a drunk since they were dating. So why is it so surprising that, once you guys have kids and you have even more stress in your life and the pressures of work and, all the other things that come with, getting older and having more responsibilities, that the person has fallen off the wagon again, in and out of rehab, losing their jobs. So, usually the person is already having problems when you're dating them. So if the person is already constantly drinking all the time to the point of being in a stupor, or to the point where you're kind of concerned, like maybe there's a problem here, or constantly doing drugs, you know, a lot of times when people tell me, oh yeah, he's always smoking weed, or he was using crack or whatever, then it turns out that, okay, well, it turns out the spouse was also smoking weed all the time too, or the spouse was also, getting drunk and always had to have a drink every single day, or multiple drinks, and they'd be hiding liquor bottles or beer cans in the closets and stuff, just like really out of control behavior that doesn't really pop out of nowhere. So that's definitely a red flag if the person has these kind of addictions already. And yeah, other kinds of addictions I've heard of are video game addictions, where the guy is, well, it's always been a guy. So it was always the man that was like addicted to video games and would like get up in the middle of the night to play games, or just spend all of his time and money playing video games and stuff. And so it's like you knew the person was like this already before. He didn't suddenly start playing video games last year. This was something that was already going on when you guys were dating and stuff, and you still married the guy because you thought it wasn't that big of a deal back then. So yeah, certain addictions are red flags. And even if the person like later goes to rehab and stuff, a lot of times people are not cured at all through rehab. They end up just like falling off the wagon, or they make more excuses, or they lie to you, and, pleading with you, saying that, oh, it's not going to happen. And on that note, another bad, or I would say the worst thing would be abuse. Like if the person is already abusive towards you in your relationship, and I've heard of men also being, assaulted by their girlfriends, just somebody who might be like bipolar, or just have a bad temper and not be able to control their impulses. Like if they're already slapping you or scratching you or punching you, trying to restrain you against your will, then it's not going to get any better the longer the relationship goes on. So run away from that. Don't get married to somebody that is already being abusive towards you, either emotionally or physically while you're dating. That's huge red flag, because when people are dating, you're kind of supposed to be on your best behavior, right? Especially at the beginning of the relationship. So if the person's already, cursing at you, trying to cut you off from your friends, trash talking your friends and family, trying to alienate you from your friends, and showing any signs of abusive behavior, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, or putting you down all the time, and not making you feel supported, then why stay in that kind of relationship? Like I said, once you get married, it's not going to get any better. So let's see. Other red flags would probably be like if the person already had like a string of failed marriages, or has a very bad relationship with their family. That's usually not good signs. And or if they seem to have unhealthy relationship with their families, because I have dealt with people whose parents were overly involved in the whole divorce and custody process. And it's crazy, because sometimes you're like, wait a second, you're a grown adult in your mid 30s or late 30s, or who knows how old, but yet, their mommy or daddy has to be involved in the whole procedure, or is a control freak trying to tell me what to do when they're not even the client. So yeah, those are all just like real red flags that perhaps this person is not a healthy person to be in a relationship with, much less get married to. So let's see. Okay. So Kayak 7C says the answer to marriage, run. No, I mean, there are definitely positive things to marriage. And that's why so many people ultimately want to get married, or find someone to get married to, to think that, oh, you found your soulmate and somebody that will be with you ideally through thick and thin, someone to possibly have children with or raise children with. So Tyler says he's creeping up to 30. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, especially, these days, people don't really get married. I mean, I don't think there's really any need to get married before you're 30, especially if you're a guy without a biological clock, right? So, yeah, definitely getting married too early is not helpful either, because I think that was a problem with my first marriage, that I got married when I was 25 and I hadn't even graduated from law school yet. So, definitely a little too early. And Kathy says, the second time I married a good friend from college. Yeah, so that's good. I mean, it's always good to, marry someone who is your friend that you have known a long time. The shorter the whole dating period, the less you have known the person, the less successful the marriage is likely to be, because you haven't really seen the person's like bad sides, or when they're not having a good day, or when they're under pressure, or see how they can handle themselves in different kinds of situations, and you don't know their family either. So that's another thing, like if the family is weird or you can't stand them, then sure, you might not want to marry this person, because I have heard, friends of friends who, after meeting their fiancés' families, were so turned off, or felt like the parents and the siblings, they were all just really weird, or just, I don't know, they just felt like they didn't fit in or something. So yeah, it's your choice. It's a free country. Nobody's going to force you to go through marriage, even if you're supposedly engaged to the person. So, let's see. Kayak says, my marriage is more traditional. I make the money working. She stayed home for the kids, so there is no splitting of bills and finances. Yeah. So, every family is going to be different, just depending on what the financial situation is, and if both people are working, and what's the difference in earnings. So Kathy says, marriage is not easy. It takes work. I agree. Both have to be committed, and you have to compromise. That's right. Yeah, compromise is the word. So if you're a very stubborn person, or your soon-to-be spouse is also very stubborn, well, that doesn't bode well. So it's all about compromise. And I think it was either Ruth Bader Ginsburg or her husband, Martin Ginsburg, who was my former tax professor, who said some sort of funny statement about how, like, the key to a good marriage is just not saying much. So, and of course, being able to compromise and know when to keep your mouth shut before you say one more thing that could really damage your relationship with your spouse. So sometimes that means, like, cursing and flat out saying, like, hey, your whole effing family is bat shit crazy, so just learn when to just shut your mouth and walk away and stew for a little bit before you say something that you might regret, right? So this channel might get sued. What are the pros and cons of getting a prenup? Yeah. Well, welcome. The pros and cons of getting a prenup. I thought I was going to make another episode about this, but I might as well touch on it real fast. So the pros of getting a prenup is that it already decides how you're going to split up your finances, if at all. A lot of times people want prenups because they're on their second or third or even fourth marriage, or they already got screwed over, or perhaps one person is a lot richer than the other person, and they want to make sure that they don't lose all of their life earnings and assets if they end up divorced. So I think definitely I'm more pro prenup, although I myself have never had one for myself. And then none of my immediate family, like nobody that I know, like my immediate family or my relatives or anybody, has had a prenup. So I think the downside is that sometimes it makes people feel very resentful, especially if it was only one person's idea, usually the richer person's idea. And then in that case, usually the poorer spouse just constantly feels like they were treated like a second-class citizen, and or they get upset, their tempers flare up sometimes, and like, why'd you make me sign that prenup? Like, you never saw me as an equal partner, and here I am raising the kids and stuff, but yet, if we split up, I don't get any alimony, So it is kind of, it's a touch and go situation. But clearly for people who are on their, say, second or whatever marriage, then usually both people are on board with that, and they know, okay, yeah, I'm already established in my career. You already have your money and stuff, and we're both able and capable of working and paying for our own bills, especially if, like people might have kids from previous marriages and stuff. So it makes sense to have a prenup to make things a lot more streamlined and clear cut if you guys divorce. Because most of the time, the prenup will just say that anything that you already owned before you guys got married will stay that person's property. And anything that stays in one person's name will always be his or her property. And anything that is held in a joint name, like a jointly titled bank account, would be split 50-50 if you guys end up separating. And then most people like it to just flat out say there's not going to be any alimony paid to either party, no post-separation support. Or in some situations, you can tweak the language and stuff and say, okay, well, if we have been married for at least 5 to 10 years at the time of separation, then I agree to give you something, for alimony for, could be like, 2 years or 3 years, or I give you a lump sum of this and that. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing where you just say, hey, screw you, go away if we split up. It could say that, well, you get this amount of money if we do split up. So, yeah, so the pros are definitely that you can save a lot of money and time and stress by not having to go through court litigation to divide up your assets or to fight over whether one person deserves post-separation support and alimony. The cons, of course, are the potential effect on your relationship if one spouse is pretty much going to be cut out of getting anything and, feels like they are a lot poorer or less likely to make as much money. So it could be a source of resentment during the marriage. And I have heard that from some people. So she says, don't mean you have to give up. I don't mean you have to give up who you are, but it's a give and take relationship. Communication is super important, and respect. Yes, I totally agree. And sometimes it takes having to see a therapist to work on communication styles, because not everybody had some sort of like perfect TV show type family, parents who were proper role models. So sometimes people end up just following the same patterns that they saw between their parents, whether the parents just wouldn't talk to each other or would hold grudges or would have really bad fights and, scream and yell. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with going to like a marriage therapist. That's always something that I recommend when people are just kind of wishy-washy and not really sure if they want to get divorced or not, and they're still living with their spouses. Have you tried counseling or therapy? Or if you're religious, is there any sort of counseling service offered through, say, your church or something? So definitely you do want to always have respect for the other person. That means no name calling or accusatory statements, cursing, obviously no hitting, throwing things at each other, where the cops are called. You definitely don't want to do that. So yeah, definitely want to have good communication skills and be willing to try therapy. Let's see, Rachel says, one of the biggest reasons I never married and eventually left my ex was because of his family. Yeah, I totally agree. Because like when I was in college, I was with my ex-boyfriend for 3 years. So it was like a big shock when, we finally broke up. But, his family, or actually it was just his parents. Yeah, his parents just seemed really snooty. And so when I was watching that movie, Crazy Rich Asians, it kind of brought flashbacks to that, where, my ex-boyfriend came from this very wealthy family. But the funny thing was that it wasn't his parents that actually earned the money. It was really his like maternal grandfather, who owned a bunch of hotels, who made the family fortune and stuff. So, yeah, especially his mother, the guy's mother, was very snooty. And, I went down to visit them one time when I was in college, and they just seemed very like cold, and they didn't really think that I was good enough for their precious son or anything like that, because he was an only child. So ultimately we did break up, and that's fine, because you don't need to be treated like an outsider or treated like crap by your future in-laws. They weren't like overtly mean to me or anything, but, I could kind of sense that they weren't really happy. Like even my ex-boyfriend had said that, they kind of wanted some like very, I guess you had to be like really like tall and hot looking and very successful, So, and also back then, yeah, it's really funny that we got on this subject, because I think like they probably thought that I wasn't from a very wealthy family, but later on, I did tell my ex-boyfriend, how much my family had and stuff, and he was shocked because, we don't look like we're well. I mean, I guess, yeah, I would buy clothes from Ross and stuff, so I guess I didn't dress well. I wasn't tall and beautiful, and from the right town. They were from like Palos Verdes, California. Had this house on the water down there. So anyway, good riddance. You don't need to be with people whose families look down on you. And if you do get into that kind of relationship, just realize that, what are the chances that the in-laws are really going to change their attitudes towards you? I mean, sometimes you hear about it like in interracial relationships where one of the in-laws doesn't like it and doesn't show up to the wedding and stuff. But then by the time the grandkids come around, then they have a change of heart. But you can't always count on that. So whatever miseries you have already, I know this sounds kind of negative, but whatever miseries you're already dealing with in your relationship before you get engaged or before you get married, it's just going to be either the same or get worse after you get married. You can't guarantee that, oh, suddenly the family's going to approve of me and love me, and treat me right after we get married. Not always a guarantee there. So yeah, thank you. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for being here. Rachel is here from another continent, from Africa, I believe. Hey, Audrey, I really liked your latest holiday gifts video. Audrey has a really great growing channel. She's getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers. So please check out her fun channel. She's a pre-med student at Boston University. Still here listening and learning. Yes. And love that movie, Crazy Rich Asians. Oh, I just hated that movie. Actually, well, hate is too strong of a word, but I felt like, it was so superficial and so like phony. And I don't get why that guy, whatever, the actor's name was something like Henry Goldblatt or whatever. I don't remember his name. So anyway, I'm like, why is this guy supposed to be like so hot and attractive? He just seemed really annoying. And then that scene where he's just like holding this like big ring towards the woman, whatever her name was. Yeah, like holding this big ring, like, oh yeah, now she's gonna marry me because I have this like big, expensive, like, 50-carat ring waving in her face. It was so stupid. I was like, what? I don't see any chemistry between these people that are supposed to be in love. And the guy's like mom just seemed to be like complete witch and stuff. So yeah, I was having PTSD remembering my college relationship and how that family didn't think that I was good enough for their precious son. So yeah, they're lost. That's right, Kathy. Oh, ugly rich folks. Yeah, ugly rich folks. Yeah. So let's see, what else? What other tips do I have based on my divorce practice on how to not get divorced? Well, you got to think of yourself as a team, of course, and often put aside your own wants ahead. Put your own wants on the back burner. That's what happens, especially if there's going to be family issues that come up. Like, let's say like one of your in-laws comes down with a terminal illness. I mean, it's bound to happen sooner or later that somebody's parents are going to have like medical problems, or perhaps your spouse might develop medical problems, or you might have kids with medical problems. Like I have a relative whose son came down with leukemia when he was only 3 years old. And it was just like an awful 3 years for them, in and out of hospitals, constant, worries, and not knowing if he was going to live, and all these like really awful, medical procedures that he had to go through. And then to top that off, my relative ended up being diagnosed with breast cancer. So, but luckily it was early stage. So everybody's okay now, but I can just see, there's so many like unseen things that happen in life. It's not all just about love and lust and having fun and going on fancy vacations together. I mean, that's fun for a while when you're dating, but then you have to get back down to reality and what is life, and, what is marriage, and, how are you going to devote yourself for the rest of your life, ideally, to another person. So it's not always going to be fun and games. There's going to be a lot of like things that crop up in life that are going to test you and make you feel like, okay, I'm really stressed out. I don't want to deal with this person, So yeah, sometimes it can be hard, but as long as you feel very committed to this person, you feel like you're on the same team, you have the same goals, the same values. That's another thing I haven't mentioned, is that just from reading a lot of relationship books over the years, and just talking to all these people in my cases and stuff, the more similar values you have with the person, the more likely you're going to have a happy marriage. So it just kind of makes sense, because what if you guys aren't of the same religion, or one person is strongly, anti-meat, vegetarian or vegan, and gets mad whenever they see somebody wearing leather or eating a hamburger or something. That these are going to be like problems, or just like disconnects that just continue to gnaw away at you guys. If there is some sort of difference in opinion, or difference in opinion as to how to raise kids, or oh, and another thing, obviously, financial stuff. So definitely run away if the person already has like a lot of financial problems and cannot handle money, especially if they're older, because the older the person is, the less likely they are to ever be able to change their ways. I guess this is kind of pessimistic, but in my opinion, it's true. I see so many divorce clients who are mad at the other spouse because of money problems. And usually they say like, oh, like she's the one that's got this QVC addiction, and always spending money, all these packages showing up, like she would just keep charging up all the credit cards and open up like, 25 different credit cards and ran them all up, and then expected me to pay them. And then sometimes it's a man who's like squandering away the money, doesn't know how to save, and they've, like, between the two of them, they have over 20 different credit cards that are all running up interest and late fees and stuff. So it becomes a total mess, especially if one person is a tightwad saver type and the other person is just like a spendthrift, doofy with money, can't keep track of the bills, doesn't pay bills on time and stuff. So that's just not really going to be a great relationship, because once you're married, then there are financial intertwinings, and you can't just really live your life separately like you're a single person anymore. So, for example, the wife might get mad when she sees the husband, running out and buying some like, motorcycle or something. Or the man might get mad when the woman wants to like just go out and buy this expensive car, without consulting with him. So, you guys pretty much need to be on the same page financially. And there are, financial coaches who, there's someone you can hire for pretty much anything, kind of therapist for any specific, like sex problems, sex therapist or financial coach, or, like parenting coach. So yeah, there are things that you can do, before just running for the hills and being like, okay, I'm through with this. You can still go through some sort of counseling and try to find someone good through a referral that can help you guys through these kind of problems. But financial problems is usually a big red flag. So yeah, just to give another little juicy anecdote. So I have had this relative who, was so happy because she met somebody after getting divorced. But here's the problem. Like, it turned out the guy, I'm like, no wonder the person is still single after all these years. Turned out he had filed for bankruptcy at least once or twice and still owed a ton of debt to the IRS. And he had to move back in with his parents to try to save money. And I was thinking, this person is like very well educated. It's so pathetic that, like he just ran himself into a bunch of debt, and, had all these excuses like, oh, it's because I got scammed into buying into this like business by somebody else, or oh, it was my ex-fiance that caused me all these problems and stuff. So there's an excuse for everything. So luckily my relative has already broken up with this person, but I mean, he seemed like a nice guy, and on the surface he seemed decent, but as soon as I heard about those financial problems he had with the multiple bankruptcies, and I did look up his bankruptcy case because that's public record, like attorneys. And actually, I think you don't even have to be an attorney. You can get what's called a PACER account on the internet. so that you can look into the federal court records. So bankruptcy is federal. So I looked up the guy's like bankruptcy case records, and I was like, what the, like there was like a whole list of all his debtors, like all the money that he owed to who knows what, like at least 50 different creditors that he had screwed over. And I was like, oh my God, like he couldn't even pay this like $300 bill, that was still outstanding to an exterminator. Yeah. So do your research, when you're dating somebody, that's when it's crucial to, even do a criminal record check on the person. There's websites like nox.com. It's KNOW, nox.com, as well as accurint.com. It's been a while since I've looked at these websites, but Accurint is ACCURINT, accurint.com, where just for a small amount of money, you use your credit card to pay, then you can look up information as to whether the person has been sued or filed for bankruptcy, what assets they have. If it's public record, then that information can be found. So I've also heard of some people who asked for a credit report, from the person they were dating. Once things were getting serious and they were thinking about getting engaged, the person asked my friend for a credit report. And I'm like, actually, that's a smart thing, because of, all the divorce cases or the potential divorce clients I've seen who are mainly upset because of the financial mess that their spouse has created. So, I'm sorry. I didn't realize there were so many comments already building up in the comment box. I love/hate the movie, I guess, Crazy Rich Asians. Love the aspect that it proved an all Asian cast crew can be a box office hit. Hate that it's a cheesy rom-com. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was pretty cheesy and superficial and kind of like a weird storyline. Yeah. Also, perpetuates some image that all Asians are just like filthy rich people. So, okay, and Rachel says, have you ever handled a divorce where the issues seem really superficial and silly? Yes, there are just too many to think about right now. And anytime I talk about my cases, I have to be very careful, not to divulge too many details where the person could potentially be identified. So let me think. Well, I mean, there was this one god-awful divorce case. It was very, very long time ago. So I feel a little better about talking about it. But yeah, they had a kid, but custody wasn't even an issue, because usually when people have children, they're like fighting over the kid too, in addition to the money and stuff. But in this case, I think the wife was especially mad at the husband because he was already cheating on her, and she had found out because she hired a private investigator. So definitely, that's not the right way to end things. Things definitely aren't going to go well if it turns out that one person is already cheating on the other person. Then how do you expect to be able to settle things amicably once the person knows that you're already screwing around and stuff? So, yeah, really superficial and silly. Well, I wouldn't say it was like totally superficial and silly, because they did have properties where they couldn't agree as to the value of the property. And then there were also, 401ks that they had already come into the marriage with, because it was the second marriage, or maybe even more than second. Yeah, for both of them. So, yeah, I guess that's not a good example of a silly issue. Let me think, silly issue. Well, there was this other divorce case where, I had to go into an apartment with my client just to get some DVDs and CDs. So I don't know, was that really worth it for her to get an attorney to go with her so she could get some CDs and DVDs back from her spouse's apartment? Yeah, luckily nothing violent happened, but it was very tension filled. And the husband had some couple of friends of his from the ministry school, just to hang out in case she went crazy or something, or tried to grab more stuff from the apartment. Yeah, so that did seem kind of silly, but to her, it was important. She really wanted those DVDs. So, yeah, I'm sure there are more examples, but I would really have to think hard about it and then think whether I can really even say anything about certain people's cases. So, are prenups generally pretty clear cut? Yes. Or are they regularly contested in court? Nah, I have not had any case that involved contesting a prenup, because I think most of the attorneys, at least around where I practice, we know that the prenups are almost always like 99.9% going to be upheld. I mentioned it can get pretty convoluted with foreign assets and creative accounting. Yeah. Well, actually, the prenups are pretty clear cut in terms of the language. So when you draft a prenup, you have to be sure you cover all the bases. So, yeah, so even if the person had foreign assets or wanted to hide stuff or whatever, well, it doesn't really matter because the prenups typically are going to say that all the parties are satisfied with the financial disclosures that have been given and waive any sort of right to request any additional financial disclosures. So, yeah, I think the prenups, at least I would hope, because nobody's come back to me yet to argue that a prenup that I was involved in was invalid. Yeah, because that's why normally, like, if one of the spouses, usually it's the wife, if the wife doesn't really understand English or speak English fluently, normally the other richer spouse should at least offer to pay to have another attorney review the document with the fiance, because otherwise then the person who doesn't really understand English 100% could later try to say, I didn't understand what was being put in front of me, and he just told me to sign this, otherwise I was going to be sent back to this other country. So yeah, I haven't heard of any cases at all where somebody was trying to fight a prenup and actually filed the lawsuit. I mean, once in a blue moon, I do hear that people are upset that they signed a prenup and they claim that it's not valid, but I've never been involved or heard of any real lawsuit around where I practice involving, trying to overturn a prenup. So normally they are drafted really well, and most attorneys know that if it's obvious that the other spouse can't even understand the contract, then you got to get that person an interpreter and an attorney, so that they can't later try to overturn or invalidate the prenup. So I hate it when people get divorced and put the kids in the middle. Your relationship can end, but don't use the kids against each other. Yeah, I know. I see that happen too many times, and these people should know better. But you just see all these people, especially when the kids are just like barely teenagers, and then the parent starts like thinking that the kid is their confidant or using the kid as a therapist or something, or using the kid as a conduit to keep talking to the other parent, and it's just so sad. Yeah, that's really sad. That's where you really feel that, these people should all go to some sort of family therapy together, or the kid probably needs to see a therapist too. It's not right for these like two damaged adults who can't act like adults to just keep, you know, acting up and acting crazy and stuff. Yeah, because I've been involved in cases where like one person was just really nutty and kept calling child protective services and making false allegations that my client was like molesting the kid. So, I had to go to child protective services with him and talk to the investigator, who seemed to, really understand and believe us, because the lady had contacted them multiple times, always making some like similar accusations against my client. So, yeah, that again, that reiterates the need to, don't get involved with somebody that already has some sort of like, bipolar disorder that's like out of control, or seems to have some sort of personality disorder. Well, I think in that situation, like the person didn't even know this person that well before she accidentally got pregnant. So yeah, that's just really sad. Feels sad for the kid, having to deal with that kind of parent. So yeah, there's only so much that therapy can do, and some people, sometimes I do hear, usually it's the man refuses to go to therapy anyway. So therapy is not always like a cure-all, obviously. So Magnello, welcome. Hey, I'm a family law paralegal in Oregon. Been doing this for several years and still can't figure out how to maintain a long-term happy relationship. Lots of laughter. Well, let's talk about your family background and what kind of relationship your parents had, and let's look for clues as to why you can't have a long-term happy relationship. Well, I mean, you have to have a happy relationship with yourself, right? Like you have to work on yourself first if you expect to have like happy relationships. Because I was actually on this like YouTube show about a month or two ago. I think it's called like what's it called? Subtle Asian Voices or something. Yeah. So it's a relatively new YouTube channel where this guy who's a pharmacist, Brian Fung, posted on one of these like YouTube or Facebook groups. It was like, hey, we're looking for people to talk about their screwed up relationships. And I was like, okay, I'll be glad to do it, because I'm older. I have no shame. I would be happy to talk about some screwed up relationship I had a long time ago. So this brings to mind like this ex-boyfriend of mine that is like, I don't even know how old he is now. Yeah, he's probably like in his 50s now, and still, got divorced and still single. And it's like, why couldn't he have a long-term happy relationship? So I'd be glad to diagnose him. I think he's like narcissistic and very self-centered, and probably just grew up thinking that he's like the SHIT, like just thinking that he's so great and stuff, and just always hypercritical of whoever he dates, and is not a very giving, open person. So some people just can't be cured. I mean, there are just some people that aren't really meant to have like they're not marriage material. So not surprisingly, this person's like ex-wife, luckily they didn't have any kids. The ex-wife used to be a friend of mine, but apparently like she packed up all of her bags and then suddenly decided to leave him after about like 5 or fewer years of marriage. And I think part of it had to do with just, he just was not like a giving, loving type of nurturing person. On a superficial level, he seemed like fun and nice and successful, had a good job and stuff, could make friends, but anything deeper, like he wasn't able to, last in any sort of like a more meaningful romantic relationship. So, yeah, I mean, it's just really hard. I think that's why so many people, once you're middle aged, people wind up going to therapists and wondering, what can I do to change myself? Or, oh, I'm still single. How come I can't find anybody? And, how do I change myself? Or do I have some bad behaviors that my exes keep harping on that I really want to change to improve myself before it gets really too late? So, yeah, there's like no magic touch or magic secret, but obviously you do want to try to be like a happy, well-adjusted person before you embark on a relationship with somebody else, much less have children with them, right? So okay, wow, a lot of comments here. So Euphoric Soul says, my husband and I are really complete opposite, but we try to figure out things and just enjoy each other's company, each other's differences. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Yeah, I mean, I said earlier that usually it bodes better for the relationship the more you have in common with the person, but sometimes, people don't mind having like a completely introverted spouse when they're the extrovert, or, one person likes the great outdoors, the other person likes staying home, I mean, because when you're married, you don't really have to do 100% of everything together at all the time. It's good, it's healthy to have like other interests or friends or hobbies too. So yeah, I can see that working out also. When we're about to argue, we always say men are from Mars, women are from Venus, remember? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading that book when it came out long time ago. I guess it's been quite a while. So I don't know if I would agree with all of the propositions in that book anymore, but it was quite a while ago. But it is true, like I think in general, like women and men have different ways of communicating, and the women might be more subtle or give hints and stuff, whereas men might be more direct and cut to the chase or blunt about things. So far, we haven't had any huge arguments during our 7-year marriage. Wow, that's great. I think being open to each other really helps, I guess. Yes, well, that's great. Okay, I'm really happy to hear about that. That's pretty awesome. 7 years of marriage and no huge arguments. That's excellent. Yeah, because I remember when my first marriage, we had a huge argument like within just like 4 months of getting married. And after that, I was like, why the hell did I marry this person? So yeah, definitely get to know people a lot longer before you get married to them. So hey girl, hey, welcome to Willis. Well, welcome to Willis. Mike had some like nice insight to us because she and her husband have a YouTube channel that's really growing fast, where it's all about their relationship, and they're both out having fun eating and traveling to Dallas or other towns and having adventures, and her husband's getting a haircut, or they're playing pranks on each other and stuff. So I think like that's really awesome to see like two people. It seems like you guys got married pretty recently though, but I'm not 100% sure, but they seem like a very happy, fun couple. So please watch their channel, check them out. It's really a lot of fun. Yeah, I like there was one episode I really liked where Sanae, the wife, put on a ton of crazy looking makeup on purpose to see if her husband would react. And that was so hilarious. I love that. Okay, so Euphoric Soul says, love the topic, but sorry, I need to go. We'll play this again later. Oh, okay, thank you. It's so nice to see you. And I know there's a time difference. So I really appreciate you guys all tuning in, especially on a weekday night. Virtual hug, thank you. It's nice to know there are all these YouTube buddies out there. Thanks for answering your question. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, feel free to let me know if there's any other follow-up questions. Who should pay the bills in a marriage? Career women are often played. Oh, I gotta mention this though, because I have had multiple cases where the woman was the one that made more money than the man. And they were always piping hot mad when it turned out they had to give a big chunk of their 401k or their investments to the man who didn't make as much. Because here in North Carolina, it's true in most states, but I can't make any actual factual statements because I'm only licensed in North Carolina. I used to be licensed in Virginia, but so in North Carolina, it's most of the time the marital assets, regardless of who actually earned them, regardless of whose name the assets are placed in, most of the time those assets are all just kind of combined along with the marital debt, and then you figure out how much is the marital estate worth, and chances are likely it's going to be split 50-50. So usually the woman is the one that gets really piping mad if they were the career woman and the man was just like, schlepping around, not pulling his weight, especially if the man started doing something inappropriate, like making phone calls to a female friend at night, or starting to look around or be inappropriate, or the man was playing video games all the time, or the man was constantly being unemployed, just being a slacker and stuff. And again, it goes back to, hey, you sort of already had these like signs before you got married to the guy that you knew he wasn't making as much as you, and that he had been, kicked out of college, or, like there were already red flags in these situations. And it's not just any one person I'm talking about. I'm talking about in general, where these women get played, career women that, they're just really happy that some man likes them or something, or maybe they have like self-esteem issues, or, in general, as more and more women get educated, then it's harder to find someone that is at the same educational or career earning level as they are. So sometimes they don't mind, quote, marrying down, but then when they're about to get divorced and then they get screwed over, boy, they are so mad about it, just like, what? I have to give him $50,000. He didn't do anything. And, especially, sometimes when kids are involved, then the, the woman might feel like, well, I still had to take care of the kids in addition to doing all this work, while he like piddled around and played his video games, or, just like couldn't hold down a job or something. And I'm like, well, you married the person. So, once he started being a slacker and stuff, you probably should have already looked to getting divorced instead of staying on for an extra 5 years. And now he has more of a claim for alimony, So for that reason, think about that, then those kinds of people, probably should get prenups where there's like a huge discrepancy in earning potential. And, if you already see the signs that the person can't hold down a job, or has already lied to you about their educational background or their ability to keep a job, it's like, okay, you still want to get married, then get a prenup. Okay. Because that's already looking like it's not going to bode well for your marital future. So, yeah, because sometimes people are just overcome by lust at the beginning, or just being happy that they found somebody. So their just rationality is clouded. Hey, Brian, that's funny, because I had just mentioned, Brian reaching out and saying he needed guests for his like Asian American mental health YouTube channel. So thank you for joining in, Brian. I know you're really busy with your job and everything, so I appreciate you guys all showing up. And oh, and Rich is here too. I know how to avoid divorce. Don't get married. Bam. I know. I already said that from the very beginning. Number one, don't get married then. I mean, in this day and age, there are so many people that just are like, we're going to be together because we want to be together, not because, we have some sort of license that we paid $60 for at the magistrate's office. Yeah. Avoid divorce by not getting married. Okay. Thank you. Welcome to Willis. Yeah. Oh, okay. So she did get married very recently. Okay. So Sine, I think I pronounced that name right. Sine and Jeremy Willis got married last year, and they live somewhere around Louisiana. So she has a really fun channel. And if you want to see a happy couple that is in love and plays pranks and has fun together, then please watch her channel. So I'm trying to think of some other issues about how to avoid getting divorced if you're married already. Because first I focused a lot on, okay, before you get married, what are these like red flags of real bad red flags, drinking, drug use, abusive towards you, bad relationship with their parents or the rest of the family, can't hold down a job, kicked out of school, kicked out of military. I've seen that happen also. And the sad thing is that, when people are carping to me about their soon-to-be ex-spouse or their baby daddy or their baby mama or whatever, they're just going off and on and on. I'm like, look, you still thought the person was great enough to get married to them, or you thought the person was good enough to live with and then get pregnant with, and you have a child with this person. So, all this bad stuff that you're saying to me about the person, it kind of is a reflection of yourself that, how could you, if what you're saying is true, you still chose to marry this person or to procreate with the person, or you still thought this person was good enough to live with for the last 3 years. So, that's why as an attorney, if any attorneys are actually watching this, you don't have to get carried away and get all like passionate and zealous, and believe everything that the client says, because most of the time, especially in family law, you eventually find out that, okay, well, that's not really the full story, or the person's exaggerating, or, you hear what the other side has to say about your client. So there's really no need to get all riled up along with your client, and I see that sometimes in like younger attorneys, or sometimes even older attorneys, you're like, can you just calm down and stop being a jerk? Because these are two people who used to love each other, or maybe created a child together. Let's try to work out their problems. There's no need to like put on an act of like arrogance, or just be a total, I don't know, expletive, when we're trying to work out some sort of divorce case, because the ultimate goal anyway is to always try to settle the case, not to inflate your legal fees and have to go to court. Although there are a few attorneys that are known to like to do that so they can make more money. So Brian says, I've been trying to make it to your other ones, but I always end up having conflicts. Glad to catch this one though. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being here. I hope I'm saying something that is of value to people. I guess a lot of these things are just common sense. Like if you have good friends, then you've probably already talked to your friends or seen your friends with marital problems, or friends that have good marriages. You ask them, hey, what's your secret, or how do you think you guys managed to have such a good marriage? Or, how are you so happy? Because let's all realize that, things that people put on social media like Instagram or Facebook, a lot of times it's just what a friend of mine called fake book. Like I had this friend who was like posting pictures of her anniversary and, like gushing about her husband. But then within a month or two, I found out that, this person was already thinking about divorcing. And, you always see those things, where people are just like posting all these like sappy things on Facebook, or, oh, I love you, blah, blah, blah. I have the best husband in the world. And, look at these roses that my boo gave me, and then later on you find out that, that things aren't really all that rosy, and, like somebody's cheating on the other person, or they're planning on getting divorced, or, they're like screaming and yelling, or the wife was threatening to file domestic violence case against the husband, so just don't keep looking at all these people on social media and then possibly feeling bad about yourself and your relationship if you have one, because everybody's just putting an image out there on social media, and a lot of it is just phony or exaggerated, or what they hope that will happen for them. It's like, if I post this happy picture of myself with my husband, then it'll mean that we have a great marriage. So Tyler says, I've always told past partners that I work in video and film. So beware of the somewhat unstable hustle culture. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's reasonable, because, there are certain professions that are going to take its toll on any sort of relationship or marriage. Like, let's say somebody's an emergency room physician, or any sort of job where you might have to fly around a lot, travel a lot, work really long hours. You're an associate in a big law firm. There's so many jobs obviously out there where you might have to work irregular hours or really have no control of your schedule. So it's important that your soon-to-be spouse also be very cognizant of what your career goals are and what kind of schedule you're going to have and how are things going to work out, especially if you plan on having children together, because, I know I know multiple people who are like emergency room physicians. And of course, all their spouses were stay-at-home spouses because somebody had to take care of the kids. So, that's something that you should really talk about to begin with, so that there isn't this like big shock or like, oh my God, now's what's going to happen. This is just kind of common sense that people should know about what the person's career trajectory is intended to be, or if one person expects to be a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home parent or would like to try some other career. Because I have seen some marriages fail because somebody just got sick and tired of working and they wanted to quit their job. In fact, one of the first North Carolina Court of Appeals case that I did, this was like long time ago when I was working for a small firm. And it had to do with this man that decided to give up his decent, well-paying job to be a massage therapist. And so, of course, the wife was mad and she was like, you just want to touch other women, you perv. So, and of course, this was terrible. So they wound up getting divorced mainly because, this guy wanted to be a massage therapist and he didn't really discuss it with his wife. And so it was just like a total mess of a case and stuff. So the case that I did for him had to do with whether it was okay for the court to impute income to him based on his previous salary. And ultimately, the Court of Appeals ruled against us and said, yeah, that was just like dereliction of his parental responsibility, something to that effect. I don't remember the exact legal language, but there have been many other cases involving child support calculations and imputing income when one of the parents kind of flips out and decides, well, I ain't going to work anymore, or I'm going to be a massage therapist, or I'm going to whatever, I'm going to make independent films or something like that. So, yeah, you really have to be on the same page, on the same wavelength in terms of careers. So, definitely the fewer surprises there are after you get married, the better it will be. So Ken, thank you so much. Yeah, Ken has shown up on a lot of my video, or actually, yeah, you were on the last live stream, right? I think we got cut off when you were asking why I left Hastings. So if that was your question, yeah, somebody asked me right after the live stream ended, why'd you leave Hastings? And then there was no ability for me to respond anymore because I had just ended the broadcast. So the reason I left UC Hastings was because they wanted me to pay out-of-state tuition. And I was surprised because when I was at UC Berkeley, I had managed to just slide right in before they changed the rules for the UC system. So I was paying in-state tuition at UC Berkeley, and I had assumed that going to any other UC law school, I could still pay in-state tuition. But a couple of weeks before school started, Hastings sent me a letter and said, well, we have our own Board of Regents and our own residency rules, so you get to pay out-of-state tuition. So after a couple of months, or maybe even less than a couple of months at Hastings, I didn't think it was worth the money because it really was more like a public quality school in a dumpy area. So I withdrew from Hastings and did a lot of different odd jobs and volunteer work, and scored higher on the LSAT and reapplied to law schools all over again. So that's how I ended up leaving Hastings and going to Georgetown. So, hey, Kat, This live chat is awesome. I love the examples you gave. Thank you. Thanks, Kat. Check out her channel. I really like your like Dollar Tree haul videos, and then she shows her kids who are so adorable. So love your channel also. So Kayak says sometimes people don't stay with the person because they're willing to put up with the issues. Sometimes they stay because they fear the divorce process and the bitter stories that are heard. That could be true. I mean, with like older people especially, I think it's more like a financial issue because I have heard, like family friends and other people that I meet with and stuff. A lot of times the older people especially are afraid to get divorced because of the financial distress that they might go under, because health insurance is so expensive. If you go out on your own, if like, let's say, the stereotype is the housewife who barely worked at all or didn't work. And then after 30 years, there's no love in the relationship and they can't stand each other or whatever, but how is she going to ever support herself and have enough money to pay for health insurance, So yeah, for financial reasons, sometimes people just still stick with the person and don't want to get divorced because they're better off financially, or at least can still have health insurance and a roof over their head. So that's why, to me, it's so dangerous for people to just completely give up their careers and not work at all during the marriage. Like, even if you have kids, there are plenty of like people who work while they still have kids, or just get back to work once the kids are old enough to go to, say, like kindergarten or something, if daycare is too expensive. So yeah, I mean, that's my word of caution to any people who are thinking about being stay-at-home parents. You really do have to worry about, what are your chances of being able to get out and support yourself if there is a divorce. So always just watch out for yourself, because you never know what happens. Even though you might think that the marriage is going great and stuff, you don't know, you can't control the other person. So yeah, that's the sad thing, is sometimes people just stay in a rut because they need to financially, or they're just out of inertia, I guess. Hey, Duke. Hey, Judy, what's your thoughts on divorce parties and resorts? What? Where the couple goes to a resort for divorce and work it out there? Really? I've never heard of that before. Where's a divorce resort? I don't know. Maybe people can go to places like Las Vegas, because you hear about these like wedding chapels in Las Vegas where you can just go ahead and get married on the fly without really needing to wait or anything. So maybe they can do that in Vegas or some other states. Yeah, because I do know that divorce is different, in different states. Like in Georgia, you only have to be separated for 6 months to file for divorce. But in North Carolina and Virginia, you have to be separated for at least a year before you can file for divorce. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some like places or resorts out there that will let you just show up there so you can get your divorce ASAP. Okay, interesting. That's why I'm still not married and childless. Well, good for you, Tyler, because that reduces a lot of stress on you. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's really no need for people to get married and have kids before they're 30. Yeah. Because let me gossip a little bit, because like this is kind of the cool thing about not having any of my real friends or relatives, like people that I know in real life. Vast majority of them never even watch my YouTube channel. So at first I was kind of annoyed. But then now it's kind of freeing because I can just like talk about them or I can just say whatever I want. And it's not like people are going to be like all appalled or aghast, like, oh, I can't believe you talked about so-and-so, So let me tell you this, because I haven't touched on the whole religious aspect yet, but I do have some relatives that are very devout Christians. And obviously, a lot of people are quite religious. And I mean, the good thing is that a lot of churches or religious institutions will have these like premarital counseling services, or they might require you to go through some sort of premarital counseling before you can get married at their church or religious place of worship. So I think that's a good thing, because like I have a cousin who, converted to Catholicism because of his wife. So they had to go through the whole marital counseling thing, and he was showing me the workbook that they had to work on and stuff. And I was like, this is really good, because they were also supposed to work through their budget, which is so important. They were talking about their finances and what their household budget was going to be like, and the roles that they would play and stuff. And I think that's so important. So, if you're not like part of a church or any sort of religious organization, then maybe it is a good idea to still go to like a experienced marriage counselor, to get some sort of premarital counseling, even if you think everything is going great between you and your fiance. I don't think it can hurt at all. So, and it probably wouldn't cost more than, like, let's say you go there for like a few sessions or something, probably wouldn't cost more than like $500 or something. So I think that would be worth it. So, yeah, just kind of off the top of my head, like, what else can you do to decrease your chances of divorces? Go through this kind of like counseling beforehand. um, and then on another note, there are some people that stay together because of their religion. So when I was getting divorced from my first husband, I was kind of surprised to get a phone call. Oops, I'm sorry, I kicked the table. So I talked to this relative of mine who's very devout. And, she just finally told me how, there were so many times that she was so miserable with her marriage and she was upset and they would have fights. And I'm like, really? Because, they always seem so happy together. You never see any of this on Facebook, or, people don't tell you about these things, even when you get together, like, well, mainly because, we're all together with other people and stuff. So this person really opened up to me and was telling me some like pretty crappy aspects of her marriage. And she said, well, but what holds us together? It's really my faith, because they were both, very devout Christians. And she was like, well, and he's my man, and, I have picked him, and, we've married and we said our vows and we're going to stick together. And I'm like, okay, well, it's also because you're a housewife and you have no source of income if you were to leave this person anyway. But, yeah, so they're still married and they still seem happy and stuff, by all accounts. But, clearly, a lot of marriages do go through rough patches and stuff. So I do have to thank this person for, being very honest with me, because I just always thought that they were doing great and that everything was happy with their marriage and stuff. But it turned out that it wasn't 100% happy all the time. And in fact, she was so mad that, sometimes she would just leave the house and not even tell the family where she was going and stuff because she was so mad. And, turned out like she had also taken some medication for a while and stuff. And so, yeah, but for some people, who are very religious, they feel like they can't divorce or they should not divorce. And so, that that does cut down on the divorce rate, I guess, feeling like that would be against your religion to divorce. So anyway, I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeanette. So at the intersection is my YouTuber friend, Jeanette, who, along with her daughter, they do a lot of really great cooking videos and hiking videos. And divorce tip: if you get divorced for the same reason multiple times, yes, that's right. Yeah, I've heard people say that a lot. If you keep seeing the same pattern, then you're the problem. You're the common denominator. Yeah, that's right. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some people that just aren't marriage material, and it's just not going to work out. And maybe the person just has some personality issues or just can't handle being flexible or working with the other person. So yeah, but that's okay. I mean, not everybody has to be married. I mean, these days it's already almost 2021. It's not like 1945, where you're expected to get married and just stick with the same person forever. So in the midst of romance, those important things like budget, jobs, and interests are mostly set aside. Yes, that is so true. Yeah, and that's why I remember a long time ago when I used to read these like relationship books that they would say the first 4 to 6 months of the relationship is always the honeymoon phase where like your brain chemistry is all like messed up, and you're just like high on the throes of love and lust, and you just kind of seem blinded to the person's faults. So that's why it's so important, don't get married so quickly after meeting somebody for the first time. So I said early on in this episode that I don't think people should get married until they've actually known the person for at least 2 years, because yeah, marriage is work. It's not just all like running off to go on a vacation and having fun all the time. It's like learning to live together and build a life together, and budget, to work through a lot of issues together, and possibly raise a family together and take care of your family obligations. So Ken says, I've heard that being a divorce lawyer is very stressful. Yes. What do you think are the least and most stressful law job? Okay, so I think the least stressful law job would probably be like something where you're just not working with people all the time, like reviewing stuff. Um, I did hear from some people who said they didn't mind doing document review because at least it was mindless work. And, document review, I always rag on that because that's like contract work for attorneys who can't find real jobs and it is unstable, but at least it is mindless. So you're just like reading through documents on a computer all day and clicking around to see if it is something that should be turned over to the other side for litigation purposes. So at least you can leave your job at the office once it's done. If you do document review, but that's also very unsatisfying and doesn't get you anywhere career wise, and it doesn't pay well, and there are no benefits to doing document review. Being a law professor seems to be not very stressful once you get tenure, and you get paid pretty well. And I would say probably like other kinds of jobs like I know some friends that review like Social Security disability denials. So they work for the federal government. But I've heard that sometimes it is stressful depending on your manager. Like if they expect you to crank out a certain number of decisions or review a certain number of cases, like if there's a quota that you have to meet, then it can be stressful. But at least with that kind of job, you don't actively have to deal with any clients and you don't have to go to court. And in fact, those jobs, as far as I know, they're all remote now. So you can just work from home and review all of these like Social Security disability case denials and write decisions using boilerplate information. I think. I mean, if anybody out there is more knowledgeable about that, let me know. And then also, I would say just like writing wills for people, like estate planning, probate, estate planning. I think that seems pretty low stress also because you don't actively have to go to court and argue for those kinds of cases, and people are usually happy to see you and they know that you're going to do this thing for them and they pay you for your services and goodbye and that's it. So but I think it could be stressful if you handle like probate, if there's like a hotly contested probate case where like multiple family members are all like fighting over grandpa's money or their parents' money, then I could see that being very stressful. But there are certainly other types of jobs that don't require you to go into court and you don't have to deal with clients yelling and screaming and crying at you and stuff. Oh, and also real estate closings. Yeah, real estate closings, because one of the people I used to share office space with is a real estate attorney, so he mostly handled residential real estate closings. So you don't have to go to court for that. A lot of it is just paperwork that a paralegal can do, and then the attorney shows up and goes through the documents and tells the person, now sign here, now sign here, now initial here, So, I mean, it's pretty monotonous, but you can get paid decently if you get enough clients, if you get enough work through all of your connections in the mortgage field or real estate field or whatever, realtors know you, then yeah, there are some firms and attorneys that make a very good living just doing real estate closings day in and day out. They don't have to go and argue with anybody or have people yelling and screaming at them usually. So, okay. My business law professor was a divorce attorney. He had a lot of crazy stories about it. His client's wife fought for possessions, but when she won, she told him to throw it all in the trash. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, actually, I do have one crazy story. So this also happened quite a while ago too. So it had to do with like an antique car that was worth probably at least $50,000 in today's dollars. So yeah, it belonged to the husband, but the husband was like this total slacker that wouldn't do anything, and he had no job, and he wouldn't leave the house, and it was just terrible because my client ended up having to pay to live in an apartment with the child, while the deadbeat husband continued living in their nice big suburban house without paying a mortgage or anything. So it was just a terrible case, but he did have this antique car that ultimately in arbitration, the arbitrator said that he could get the car back, or the car was his, but he would need to remove it from the driveway by a certain date. So, of course, the guy being a slacker never got his antique car out of the driveway. So we said, well, then it belongs to my client then, because that's what the arbitrator said. But ultimately, we had to go to court again anyway because the husband hired another attorney. So she argued, I can't even remember what exactly her argument was that the arbitrator overstepped his boundaries or whatever. I don't know. I mean, ultimately, the judge almost admonished my client, and said that she was being greedy, that was his car. And I was like, well, that's not right, because we had agreed to arbitrate, and the arbitrator said that he had until this certain date to get that friggin' antique car out of the driveway, otherwise it belonged to her. So anyway, yeah, that was kind of a mess. And then you do get like some clients who want to nickel and dime over every single little thing, and it just becomes exhausting. Like, what's the fair market value of a used chocolate fondue fountain? Does anybody want to buy somebody's used chocolate fondue fountain? I mean, I probably wouldn't even pay $5 for it, especially now with COVID. Do you want somebody's used like kitchen utensils and stuff? So, oh, there was this other case I had where they were squabbling over the value of some china. I mean, who cares about fine chinaware these days? I'm talking about, like, these are old people who cared about china, and apparently not the country, the material. So my client's wife like spent thousands upon thousands of dollars every year because she had to have this, like, was it Lennox or one of those like famous brands of dinnerware, which I guess in the olden, well, not even in the olden days, but even in the 80s or whatever, I guess some of these like older people just loved collecting the chinaware, and they would spend all this money. You had to get like the whole matching set with the little teacup and the saucer and the creamer, the pitcher, the platter, and it costs thousands and thousands of dollars, and there are all these like fancy patterns, and some patterns are more exclusive than others. So yeah, I did have this one case. It was absolutely ridiculous where they were squabbling over what the value of that china was. So I even went on eBay. I was going on eBay to try to look for this specific type of like china and crystalware and stuff to see how much it could garner used. Yeah, but that's disgusting. I don't want to buy somebody's like used china set from 1985 or 1975. That's disgusting. So I think that's kind of fallen by the wayside, but you'd be surprised like what people argue over when they're getting divorced, to say, well, she spent, $50,000 over the span of these years, buying all that fine chinaware and crystalware, and everything had to be matchy match, and that stuff cost us a lot of money. So I want that assessed against her so that she doesn't get more of my 401k money. So it can get pretty ridiculous there. So, yeah, so now we're talking a little bit more about divorces and the craziness of divorces. But I realized that it is now well over an hour. So it's an hour and 21 minutes now. So I think I will end it unless anybody has any last minute, very quick questions, since it is a work night. Okay, well, I do appreciate everybody being here. I hope there was some knowledge that I was able to share with you guys. And of course, if you have any other ideas for future little live stream shows or for future videos, please let me know. Tomorrow's video, I know I'm cranking out the videos like crazy, but it's because I finally have some spare time now when work slows down in December. But then come January, I most likely am not going to be able to do as many YouTube videos or live streams, because January is when everybody calls the divorce attorneys after the holidays. So tomorrow's video is going to be a fun one, finally, about it's going to be called Rate My Frumpy Lawyer Wardrobe, and shop with me on Yes Style. So Yes Style is like this website that's based in Asia with all these like fun, popular, hip, latest fashions. So I hope you guys enjoy that. The episode turned out a lot longer than I thought it would. So thank you all for being here. And I'm sorry. How do you separate your life emotions from the pressures and dramas of your cases? Well, I think it just comes from experience, because early on in my career, I made the mistake of just getting a little bit too wound up in my clients' lives and their cases, and, just talking to them. And so that's a problem. Like, and other divorce attorneys have told me this, even older people. They said, oh, I kind of become friends with my clients. And, I have that problem. So you have to eventually learn, like, these people aren't your friends. Once the case is over, you're never going to hear from them again, and half of them are going to be lying or exaggerating about your cases, or some of them might just get mad at you later on and want refunds and stuff. So don't get too personally involved, and don't think that the clients are your friends. So I'm sorry to say that, but it does kind of leave you jaded after years of experience dealing with so many different kinds of personalities and stuff. So I just try not to take things too personally, and try not to, yeah, definitely don't start thinking like this person is like my buddy or my friend or anything. It's a business relationship. As Michael, the way of Kung Fu, would say, it's a transactional relationship. It's not like a real relationship with certain types of people. So that's how I separate my life from the drama of my cases, that I'm not going to stress out too much about this person's case. It's not going to be worth it for my mental health either. So that's what I do, I guess. I mean, it's hard, yeah, but I think just with experience, sometimes it does get better. So thank you for being here, Ken, and I really appreciate everybody's support. I can't believe that I reached 600 subscribers today in the middle of the afternoon, and I was like so happy. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it that I have 600 subscribers finally. It just seems like such a tough uphill battle. So thanks again for being here tonight, and maybe we'll do another live stream later on this weekend, probably on Sunday evening then. Have a great week. Take care.